The air is thick with dust, the smell of sweat and fear hangs heavy, and the only sound that can be heard above the rhythmic clink of pickaxes against stone is the drip, drip, drip of water seeping through the cracks in the mine. Here in the heart of the Andes, deep within the bowels of the earth, a silent rebellion is taking place. The indigenous Mapuche people are resisting the oppressive rule of the Spanish crown. But they're not doing it with weapons or open revolt. Instead, they are fighting back with an equally potent weapon: silence. They are disappearing without a trace, vanishing from the mine shafts they have worked for generations. This is Chile in the 16th century, a land rich in silver, a metal coveted by the Spanish crown, and one which has the power to both corrupt and enrich. For the Mapuche people, however, the mountains and the earth are sacred. And when the Spaniards arrive demanding tribute and labor, they resist. Their rebellion is not born out of hate, but out of love for their home, a love so profound that they are willing to sacrifice everything to protect it. Our story begins here at the Pomer saltpeter cave. In the 16th century, this cave was a vital source of saltpeter, a key ingredient in the production of gunpowder. The Spanish were eager to exploit this resource, and they turned to the local Mapuche people to do the dirty work. In exchange for their labor, they promised the Mapuche a share of the profits and, perhaps more importantly, a chance to escape the increasingly brutal encomienda system of forced labor system that was taking a heavy toll on the indigenous population. The Mapuche saw this as an opportunity and flocked to the saltpeter caves by the thousands. But once inside, they found themselves trapped in a nightmare. The Spaniards kept them working around the clock, with overseers whipping them into a frenzy. Any who did not meet their quotas were starved or beaten until their bodies gave up. Life was cheap and the men died young, leaving behind widows and orphans who were forced to continue the work to pay off their father's debts. It was a system designed to break the Mapuches, to turn them into shadows of their former selves. But something the Spaniards did not bargain for was the Mapuche's indomitable spirit. They refused to be broken. Instead, they began to fight back, but not with the weapons the Spaniards expected. You see, for the Mapuche, the mountains and the earth are more than just rocks and dirt. They are sacred, they are the home of their ancestors and the provider of their sustenance. To disrespect the earth is to invite the wrath of the Orishas, the spirits that dwell within it. And the Mapuche knew that if they could tap into the Orishas' power, they might just have a chance against the seemingly invincible Spaniards. Deep within the mines, away from the prying eyes of the overseers, the Mapuche miners would gather. They would take offerings of food, tobacco, and alcohol and pour them onto the ground, asking the Orishas for protection and strength. They sang songs of their ancestors, calling on their wisdom and courage. And slowly but surely, they built a network of support, a community of resistance that thrived in the darkness of the mines. But their most potent weapon was their knowledge of the land. You see, the Mapuche had been mining in these mountains for generations, and they knew every twist and turn of the tunnels like the back of their hands. They knew where the veins of silver were, and they used this knowledge to play a deadly game of cat and mouse with the Spaniards. When the Spaniards would find a vein of silver, the Mapuche would sabotage their tools, making them dull or breakable. They would hide the ore in secret pockets, making it seem as though the mountain was barren. And when the Spaniards grew desperate and began digging deeper, the Mapuche would collapse the tunnels, burying any who ventured too far under tons of rock. To the Spaniards, it must have seemed as though the mountain itself was rising up against them, as though the very earth was punishing them for their greed. In the end, the Spaniards would abandon the mines, leaving the Mapuche to reclaim their home. But the Mapuche were not done yet. They had learned too much from generations of living under the shadow of the encomienda system. They knew that to survive, they needed to adapt, to be able to disappear into the shadows and become one with the darkness. And so they fled the mines and disappeared into the mountains, becoming ghosts in their own land. The Spaniards never found them, and the mountains remained the Mapuche's sanctuary ever since. Today, the story of the Mapuche silver miners is all but forgotten. The Spanish crown amassed a fortune from the silver mines, and the encomienda system continued to thrive for centuries. But the Mapuche survived, and they did so by embracing the shadows, by becoming the ghosts of the mountain. Most historians agree that the Mapuche were driven out of the mines by the encomienda system. However, there is evidence that the Mapuche had been disappearing from the mines long before the encomienda system was introduced. According to some accounts, the Mapuche began to flee the mines as soon as the Spaniards arrived, as though they had known from the beginning that the Spaniards were not to be trusted. This suggests that the Mapuche may have been driven out of the mines by something more than just the encomienda system, something more primal, something in the air itself that told them to run. There are legends, stories whispered around campfires, tales of a time when the world was different, when the lines between the physical and spiritual realms were blurred. These stories speak of a time when the Orisha lived among the humans, when they walked the earth in physical form, interacting with the humans, guiding them, protecting them. But as time went on, the Orisha grew weary of the human world. They grew tired of the pain and suffering, the greed and betrayal. And so they retreated to the mountains, to the caves and valleys, to become one with the earth. Some say the Orisha did this willingly, that they chose to leave the human world behind. Others say they were forced out, that the humans, driven by their insatiable greed, chased the Orisha into the mountains, destroying their homes and polluting their sacred sites. Whatever the truth may be, the Orisha are gone now, or are they? Some say they still live in the mountains, watching the humans, waiting for the day when they will return. These legends speak of a deep connection between the Mapuche and the Orisha, a bond that transcends the physical world. If true, it would explain why the Mapuche were able to tap into the Orisha's power, why they were able to call on the spirits to help them in their time of need. It would also explain why the Mapuche knew so much about the land, why they were able to disappear into the mountains and become one with the darkness. The Mapuche knew that the mountains were alive, that the rocks and rivers, the trees and animals were all connected by a web of life. They knew that everything had a spirit, that everything had a story. They respected that and lived in harmony with the land. The Spaniards, with their greed and arrogance, did not understand this. They saw the mountains as nothing more than piles of dirt and rock, as obstacles to be overcome, as resources to be exploited. And so the Orisha fought back, using the Mapuche as their instruments. In the end, the Spaniards could not win against the Orisha. They abandoned the mines, leaving the Mapuche to reclaim their home. But what does this mean for us? What can we learn from the Mapuche and the Orisha? Perhaps it is time to listen to the stories that have been passed down to us, to pay attention to the whispers of the wind and the murmur of the trees. Perhaps it is time to remember that we are not alone in this world, that we are all connected by a web of life. Perhaps it is time to embrace the shadows, to learn to disappear into the darkness and become one with the night. As the sun sets over the Andes Mountains, casting long shadows across the land, we are reminded of the Mapuche silver miners, the Orisha, and the legend of their silent rebellion. We are reminded that even in the darkest of times, hope can endure, and that even the smallest of voices can make a difference. The Mapuche may have lost their homes and their way of life, but their story lives on, reminding us that the earth is our home and that we must respect and protect it.